Hello. Sorry if this is a little bit of a jump scare. You are all going to get ready with me as we talk about this Ballerina Farm article that I've been seeing all around as a part of my new series, which is a real Tradwife reacts or traditional wife reacts. I don't know exactly what I'm going to call it right now, but actually I forgot my makeup and my toddler is crying a little bit, so be right back. All right, out of the bag. So back to what I was saying about the new series, Tradwife Reacts. The first video might not be up yet. You might not be seeing the first video, and this might be the first video because for some reason I was reviewing a Dr. Phil video, and although there's fair use, you can use like people's clips legally, you're allowed to. For some reason, Dr. Phil has like a stronghold on people doing so. So that's why you might see this video first. If you're wondering like if this came right out of the blue, it is a new series that I'm launching about reaction videos. So if you have anything that you want me to react to, please leave it in the comments below or send me a DM on Instagram. I'd be happy to take a look at what it is. This is generally a blind reaction, although I have seen videos of people, especially on TikTok, critiquing this article more so from the feminist view, and then I've sort of started seeing some traditional wives talk about it online as well, and I just felt might as well read this article with you. Though like I said, I have read a little bit about it through other people's quotations of it right now, and I can give you my honest opinion. We will go into it as much as possible while my kids are napping, and if they wake up, we're just gonna stop wherever it leads. So first off, the title says Meet the Queen of the Tradwives and her 8 children. And it talks about like, is everything that she's accomplished a feat for feminism or something to be critical of? And I do want to say right off the bat, Ballerina Farm, I don't follow her, I've seen her content. She makes a work of art and it is a business. So whoever dubbed her the Queen of the Tradwives, I do not believe are actually traditional wives, because people who make traditional wife content online are honestly just kind of like your average traditional wives living their lives. They don't have like these multi-million-dollar businesses, and they do come out and talk about themselves as traditional wives. Apparently, from what I read in the critiques, Ballerina Farm does not even consider herself a trad wife. So take that as you will, but I definitely do not consider her the queen of the Tradwives. If anything, I would consider somebody who lives a more so normal life, such as Mrs. Midwest, to be the queen of the Tradwives. But let me know down below, what do you think? So the first chunk of the article just basically lists some of her accomplishments, notably what she had been popular for over the past couple of months, which was attending the Mrs. World pageant, where she represented the United States. And I've already talked about this on my Instagram as well. A lot of people are very critical about somebody doing this, but basically my point of view, having been somebody who's competed in international pageants, was coming from the perspective of like, she probably didn't necessarily plan being pregnant and having this baby around that time. And when you compete in an international pageant, a lot of people have invested a lot of money into you. So just up and saying like, I can't do it is really a big deal. So I'm sure she had a lot of support that I wish actually she would have talked about and thanked people. She probably had like special privileges, such as like opting out of rehearsals or certain chairs and like physical accommodations, which like I said, I wish she would have talked about, because then that would have not taken away from the accomplishments that she did and like proving how strong she is in order to do so, but would have also given a message at the same time to women that like, you know, this is out of the ordinary. This isn't something that every woman can do, and it's okay if you don't do it, and I did have help. And then it goes along to say how she didn't complain, how she grew her following on TikTok to millions and millions, which is an accomplishment. Again, I don't want anybody watching this video to think that I am saying like she's not the queen of the Tradwives in a way out of like jealousy or downplaying her accomplishments. She makes works of art in terms of her content. It is a work of art. But it's important to have that context. A lot of the people who are becoming popular in the Tradwife movement, such as that other model, Nara Smith, are represented by agencies. Actually, the agency that represents Nara Smith specializes in like preparing models in their social media presence for the real world after they're done being models. So it's not downplaying that like these women really do make beautiful content and should be applauded for it, but it's just saying that when you're talking about Tradwife content and like a real authentic Tradwife content, you're more so better off looking to like the actual everyday stay-at-home moms that make that type of picture of what it is. And so that kind of bothers me that the media doesn't even really acknowledge many of those women when they are really like the backbone and the Tradwife movement. There really isn't much substance in the next chunk of the article as well. It's just like painting a picture of meeting her for the first time and what that was like, and then her husband greeting her at the door. This is very difficult to do, by the way, on camera. Greeting her at the door, and of course painting that like little house on the prairie type of picture. Living out here must be hard to envision all the millions of eyes watching them. I feel like we're doing what God wants, Neilman said. We're on his errand a little bit. Daniel adds, we're on his errand a little bit, she repeats. So a lot of criticism that I saw was about this little line, and reading the article kind of in its entirety, I mean, I'm only like 1/4 of the way, but nitpicking that little line, it definitely does make me think that it was blown out of proportion, the criticism, a little bit, because my husband and I, like, we repeat things off of each other all the time, and it's not just like I'm repeating what he's saying and he's not repeating anything that I'm saying. I definitely believe that was taken out of context just to kind of seem like, see, she's like this oppressive wife who repeats what her husband says. But I've even had best friends where like we would say something like that. It's totally normal. So next up, she's asked how she deals with all the criticism, and she admits that she doesn't take it very well, and that she looks to her husband for advice, and he takes it pretty well. And essentially what I'm getting from that paragraph is like he helps her get through the criticism, which again is a very normal thing, especially in a masculine feminine type of relationship. It is normal to go to your husband and have him be your support. Doesn't mean that you are not capable of picking yourself up yourself, but that is one of the perks of marriage. And this was another part of the article that a lot of people were offended about, because because like I've mentioned in other videos, when people view traditional relationships from the outside, they kind of do think it's like master and puppy dog type of thing, but it's not. It's being able to relax in one side of who you are, knowing that the other person has your back in that other aspect. And she doesn't have to be strong to all the criticism when her and her husband are a brand, are a business together, and she can rely on him for that masculine moral support. Men are not as easily like emotionally affected by criticism, just because if they are developed healthily in their masculinity, because essentially they are ready for war, in the like, you know, nicest terms to put it. And again, this doesn't mean that a woman is not capable of defending herself. That is an important aspect to have of yourself, but a perk of being married, like I just said, is that you don't have to, and you can have that masculine moral support telling you not to worry about it. There's so many things that I go to my husband for, and I am a worried mess about it, and he's able to rationalize and ground me in that. And I don't think that makes me weak. I don't think that makes me not capable of taking care of myself if he were not here. But that's just the added bonus of like us complementing each other. So I don't need to talk more on and on about that. So she talks about like 15 years ago, the origin of the trad movement. And actually, I am happy that this writer dug a little bit deeper, even though she's talking about her as the queen of the tradwives. And like I mentioned, I don't think that is accurate. She did talk about its origin about 15 years ago, and like I just mentioned, that is pretty accurate. Like it's a rejection of boss babe feminism, of the lean in culture that a lot of us young millennials and older Gen Zs, zillennials, grew up with. It is a reclaiming of motherhood. It is essentially like a rebranding of feminism, although many of us do not like to call ourselves feminists, of women who are like, hey, like instead of, you know, trying to push us all into turning more like doing what all the men are doing and rejecting what we may naturally want to do, which is motherhood, homemaking, tending to the domestic sphere, why don't we lean into that a little bit more? And I have many videos going on about that if you're interested in truly defining what the Tradwife movement is, because it isn't just baking sourdough bread and Little House on the Prairie type of thing, although that can be a part of your aesthetic if you choose. And I also really like that she talked about those who succeeded. I think that's what she's saying, and I could be wrong, but I think that what she's saying is those who succeeded at the joys of motherhood and looking like having it all kind of gave this smug, I don't know if she's talking about like smug people who rejected that or people who are doing it all being smug, but if she's talking about people who are doing it all being smug, yes, I definitely agree, because we shouldn't be making cultural changes for a small subset of women while neglecting the mental health and physical health and overall well-being of children and family of the large majority. And we know this is based on data. They've done studies on this, that the large majority of women after they have children would prefer, as long as they feel safe and supported, to work not at all or part-time. That is the vast majority of women. And I know I get a lot of comments sometimes being like, well, I live in a small town and everyone's a stay-at-home mom. The overall culture, 75% of women in like the US and Canada are like working full-time, and we can't deny the fact that the archetype of the modern woman right now, which is the expectation of women, is to work a 9 to 5, put your child into full-time daycare, and climb the corporate ladder. So of course there are going to be outliers, but my point, that is paradoxical to the data that we have of women and what they actually want. And people critiquing the Tradwife movement tend to say things that don't address this issue and put a blanket statement of like having a job is going to cure you and prevent you from being abused. And I will go into this in further videos, but that is not where the issue lies. The issue lies in terms of like a toxic culture and toxic people who don't support and uplift healthy traditional marriages, which is what the traditional wife movement at its core is trying to do. Uplift these healthy marriages, hold people accountable to living a healthy traditional lifestyle where both people flourish, and it is not founded in abuse, and it is actually a good educational tool if you do listen to us normal Tradwife content creators, to create a culture that looks down on unhealthy and abusive relationships and relationships where women, of course talking about women, are getting mostly burnt out. She cites a couple more Tradwife influencers. The only person that she cites that like actually does live a more of a normal lifestyle is Estee Williams. Nara Smith, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, does not even say that she is a Tradwife. There's a difference between being a Tradwife influencer and somebody who appeals to a more Tradwife aesthetic. And then again, I have videos talking about the difference in those two things, so highly recommend my playlist. Leslie Root, a behavioral scientist at the University of Colorado. Tradwives are seen as a counterculture against the rot of low birth rates. This isn't isolated, it is a part of a wider political anxiety, and I'm worried might ultimately end up in attempts to circumscribe women's lives. So I definitely disagree with the Tradwife movement being propped up by low birth rates. I think that is inaccurate because that is only looking at the United States. We have different problems in the UK, Australia, Canada, and the Tradwife movement is still growing, and it has nothing to do with birth rates. If anything, our government doesn't care at all about birth rates because they're replacing the population that they need for, I'm not going to go into it, revenue purposes with immigration. So sometimes I also want to say, and I don't mean for this video to sound like critical or have like a negative tone, but I do find that a lot of times when people will criticize or they will comment on the Tradwife movement, they will do it very US centric, when the Tradwife movement is a Western phenomenon as a whole, and to only view it based on like birth rates of the United States is an inaccurate judgment. You have to look at it from like the entirety of the Western culture and why women are gravitating towards this, despite the differences that we have in each of our individual countries. So she also asked her, like, does she identify as a tradwife, and does she identify as a feminist? And she basically says not necessarily to both of those things, which is fair because they are a business at the end of the day, and they didn't come on the internet to talk about tradwife culture. That is a very good and honorable thing to say, because sometimes people try to like coast on trends to benefit themselves. And obviously that's not necessarily what she's doing. Although of course she is dodging the question of if she is a feminist or not. And some people were saying in the criticism that is because, again, they are a brand, they need to make money. They can't just come out and say something that's controversial that could affect their sales. So that's another reason why it's important not to necessarily assign tradwife aesthetics with tradwife influencer, because then you get the two mixed up a lot. And the fact that her husband said co-CEO, I don't see how that is abusive at all. That is literally coming out, and even if they are not co-CEOs, and even if he technically does run more of the business because it's like the farming hands-on thing, that he's elevating his wife in the importance of her role by saying that they are co-CEOs. She asked them if they're planning on having another baby. She said that they're getting old and worn out, and then like her husband talks about how he'd want to fill the 15-seater. And so now I'm getting a better picture of the article, but a lot of people were using this as saying like he's pressuring her into having more children. And I believe that it goes on later to talk about how she gets pregnant like every 9 months or so, and trying to paint this picture as if she's an oppressed woman into having babies. And I think that that is a very serious thing to say. We are progressing more in the article. Sorry, I didn't realize how long the article was. So we're gonna skip through a couple parts here, but I was basically talking about how a lot of people online talked about how she was being reproductively abused, I guess, because her husband was joking how like at exactly 9 months it just happens to be that she gets pregnant again. And she talks about how it's a matter of prayer for her, and they don't use contraception because they are Mormons. So a lot of people said that he kind of coerced her, and he like took her out of this lifestyle of being a ballerina. But the more I read into this article, the more I see that it really seems like those who are criticizing the critics, talking about coercive journalism, could be what is at play here. Before I filmed this video, I did see friend Victoria talk about on Instagram how she posted that they were supposed to basically be following her around. So that's a little bit different when you take into context a couple joking with each other or doing like small banter throughout this interview process than actually like a serious sit-down interview. If they definitely thought that people would run with it and think that she was being reproductively abused, they wouldn't necessarily have that joking attitude that they do with each other about filling the van. That was probably just like a comment in passing, just like my husband and I joke about like, are we gonna have 3 kids or 4 kids? Sometimes it's like 3 kids, sometimes it's 4 kids. But at the end of the day, if we were to sit down with like an interviewer and we knew that it was a serious interview that could get taken out of context, we wouldn't do that banter back and forth. But knowing the context of the fact that this was supposed to be just her following her and shadowing her around for the day, not like a hit piece about like trying to find where she is being abused and like she must be being abused, that can be taken any which way. And a couple more things, because like I said, I didn't realize how long the article is that I want to touch on. The interviewer kind of paints it as if it's the villain who took her out of this inspiring career to become a mom, although throughout the article they do make it clear that this was their dream that they grew together. It kind of had me thinking, a lot of times feminists like to play up the picture of what the woman sacrifices in a marriage when it really is a joint type of thing. Like for example, my husband would be fine just living in a 1-bedroom apartment with like 1 couch and no decor. But John, are you listening to this? And so like journalists, if you know, if feminism was reversed, can be like, wow, like look at him being abused, that like he has to work to because she wants this house, and he has to provide because like she wants a nice car. No, like that's not how marriage works, and especially traditional marriage. Both come together and put your best foot forward, and there are little sacrifices, but it's not even appropriate to necessarily say that they are sacrifices, because when you love somebody, you joyfully do that, and only looking at one person and dissecting one person misses the whole big picture of their relationship together. And there's another part in there where it talks about how she was on a flight and like his dad owns the airline company, so he got on the flight in order to talk to her. And you can think about that which way you want to, but for some people that would be an endearing and attractive thing. Everybody has different preferences on like how strong they're comfortable with somebody pursuing them. So I don't really have much comment towards that, because that doesn't necessarily seem creepy in my eyes. Another thing she talks about is how it's very difficult to get a word in with her. But again, going back to the context of the interview, apparently it was supposed to be like a shadowing type of thing, like a day in the life type of thing, not like this dissecting piece trying to find an edge to put forward a certain narrative. So in that case, of course, it's very normal that the kids are bothering. That even supports my point of what I was saying earlier, that I'm sure if this was going to be as serious of an interview as they thought it was going to be, they would get their babysitter that they use for date nights out to babysit their children to be able to do this article properly. Anybody with 2 brain cells would do that. Not trying to pick a joke here, but like they do own a multi-million-dollar company and a social media brand. So I'm sure that they have enough common sense to know that if it were a serious interview, to do that. Lastly, the only part where I will say, and I will point out, that there could be a little bit of an unhealthy balance here is the part where they say that like she lays in bed because sometimes she gets very exhausted, and that they don't believe in nannies and babysitters. And I always thought that, you know, with the amount of wealth that they had, they would have. I personally do not necessarily believe in that, although if you have a lot of kids, even back in the day, like during our grandma's time, it was normal to have a mother's helper, which wasn't replacing the mom. So like you have that important aspect of bonding. The mother is the main presence, but you have an extra helping hand. And when you have that many kids and the disposable income to do that, that is the only place where I would agree and say that I think that it is a little bit unreasonable that they don't open up their options to potentially getting some help, especially if she lays in bed being exhausted. That's also a matter of safety when you have young kids and you can't actually watch them, and her husband has to tend to this farm and this business. It can't just go not operational for a week. So somebody has to step in and help out a little. Again, I want to go back to the fact that, you know, of course they believe in more of a traditional way of parenting, so they don't really have like tablets. I think they said they don't really have social media, tablets, that kind of thing, or they have it like very limited. TV. So I can understand the emphasis, and we are having a positive discussion now in mainstream media about how like daycare and other people watching your kids, it isn't necessarily the best for their development. But in the same breath, you cannot be a good mom if you are like physically falling apart at the seams. So there's got to be some sort of like give here, and that's the only thing about this article that really I would say like that the writer has a point. If she went in there and she saw that that was happening, maybe there needs to be a little bit of a reevaluation, and you don't necessarily have to compromise your values, but if you have that extra disposable income, you know, use it for a little bit more help. So my makeup definitely probably did not turn out that good because I was trying to do it with the little mirror. We will get better at this series. Leave your comments. What did you agree with what I said? Did you not agree with what did you want to add? I'd be interested in hearing it, as this is more of like an open dialogue type of series. That's the goal for this series. So I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.